keeps on trying to see how God is operating and bringing people together and striving for peace. And it's just a completely turnaround almost, rather than a fear of the world and kind of backing away from it, which existed beforehand. There's this engagement with it, and it's just so positive.
We were attracted to Maryknoll because it has a very social justice perspective of faith, and that was really important to us. That we really weren't about, converting the pagans. We really wanted to work for an organization that was about global justice and gospel values. So that attracted us to that group.
Once there, we had the luxury of figuring out what are we going to be doing when we get there. So we had about 6 months to find out, which is really kind of to the question, like what do we do as missioners? And it wasn't predetermined that you're going to preach or you're going to do youth groups. It was when we got there, what is it that our skills could be useful for? What was it that most needed to be done that we could offer?
We'd say in Spanish, llegamos con nuestras maletas vacías, so that we come with empty suitcases and really immerse ourselves in the reality.
I started an ecology group of people in our town. People didn't know what ecology was in our town, so it made this open area. There were people, if I started a social action group, they said, okay, the political types would be there. If I'd start a prayer group, the spirituality folks would be there. But ecology was this new place where people wanted to be of service to their community and wanted to have some kind of spiritual underpinning, even though it was pretty vague, could grab onto. I could put it really simply in terms of what does this mean in terms of theology. Jose Condorcet put it well. He said, the problem with the church is it worries too much about heaven and not about the earth.
And I absolutely think that the church needs to be both where people are spiritually, but also where there are movements for justice, because that's what the gospel's about.
I remember the first time I read through these, and I was amazed that the Catholic Church had written these, and found them to be very prophetic in some ways, especially these two sections of the Church in the Modern World. To be able to state that within here that persons in extreme necessities are entitled to take what they need from the riches of others doesn't sound like the Christianity that often gets peddled. There's a definite angle towards the poor here.
Vatican II, there's a style that forms really underlies, it's the message that we look at the signs of the time and reflect on what's happening in the world in the light of our faith. And that would be what we would do as we would be working as missionaries. We'd gather people together and saying, what's happening around us? Can you name it? And then let's back up a step, and what does our faith say that is happening, and what should we do in the light of our faith? So it was in terms of what would be the role of the church. It's that process of moving us forward and basing it's always back in our Christian values. There isn't even I can even say this to the point where I'd see a limitation, that those values were always putting humans at the center of things, that the earth always revolved around human values, what's good for humans. The documents of Vatican II go back to the role of human dignity, and as humans we entered into civilizations at the point when we started caring for the weakest members of our society, the young and the old, and building shelters around the weakest members of our society. Taking that, carrying that forward to say that the weakest members of our society have a claim on the rest of us is really the basis of justice, that everybody has to have right relationships with everyone around them, not dependent on strength, but dependent on respecting humans.
I think, how do I take these documents and how do I put them into my own life? And that's where we become where the tension happens, because we can think this, we can read these different documents and gospels, and we can hear the stories of people who suffer, and yet how many of us still come back and choose to stand in line at Starbucks, you know, to buy a $5 cup of coffee a couple times a day without thinking. I think the other piece that I just wanted to touch on about what does this have to do with us, how does it affect us at SU, you know, one of the things it ends with here in section 1, under the section of speaking about peace, is talking about those of us engaged in the work of education are called to instill peaceful sentiments in people's minds. Every one of us needs a change of heart, and I think that's what we need to talk about, is what is that change of heart? How is that education not only giving us knowledge, but how is it changing our heart? And I think that when we start to look at these documents, if we don't look at them with our heart and ask that question, then they should just be another book on the shelf.
Yeah. See, like, they don't have some major things, like they don't have anything around the sense of saving the planet, around the activity about the sustainability, the ecological. They don't have an understanding of the role and the importance of the work of women nearly as much as they would have. There's just many things that have sort of, I don't think they have as full an understanding as we have today of through exegesis of who Jesus Christ really was. There's a fuller understanding of that today, 40 years after the council than it was at that time.
Things seems to be happening at a quickened pace, and I think what the church can remind us, especially in today's world, about is to take time away and to look at what is important in our lives, and to invite people to really slow themselves down and to really reflect more deeply on what their particular values might be, how we can live as a people at peace with one another. I think that's another issue that's alive in the world today, is what can the church say about the conflicts that exist in the world? How can the church help to facilitate conversation among cultures that goes beyond just the little sound bites that we often hear in the news, and to take it to a deeper conversation about what really matters in life?
Al encuentro del Señor, juntos como hermanos, miembros de una iglesia, vamos caminando.
We live in a very busy time. Could you cut that for a minute? Sorry. Now my phone's ringing here.